are bright and shiny in my mind. You got me loving, hating, crazy, indecision in my mind.
Welcome to the Fall Podcast, where the focus is on deer hunting, tips, tricks, tactics, and stories from across the Midwest. And now, here is your host, Aaron Blasey.
Welcome to the Fall Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Blasey, and this is episode number 43. And today we have our first female guest, and I'm not going to lie, I'm really excited about it and really can't wait to get her on the phone. The reason why we wanted to reach out to Lindsey is because she did something this year that you just don't hear about every day with a woman hunter. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, she went out, she has her own property in Iowa, she sets it up by herself, does all the food plots, hangs the stands, does the cameras, and she laid the smackdown on a giant this year. And I can't wait to hear the story.
Yeah, me neither. And for me, it's just a matter of hearing another awesome success story, and it's got nothing to do with the fact that it happens to be a female. I mean, there's so many women hunters now on the scene, and they've done a great job in taking that stereotypical, like, girls hunt too, thing out of the equation. Like, now, if you ask me, like, we're just hunters, and she's got a unique story because she did all the work herself, just like everybody else did, or does for that matter. And she was going through some tough times, and this was her reward for getting through all that stuff that she was going through. And the way she talks about the story is totally, I want to say mind-blowing, but it's not. It's captivating is what it is. It's very captivating because just hearing her speak about that hunt and what she had to do to have the opportunity, I felt like a kid in kindergarten getting read a book, just sitting there, like, hanging on every word. And it's one thing to do that as you're watching a film or a video, but to just hear somebody talk, like, we've never met her face to face, but just hearing the story was just awe-inspiring. And like I said, it has nothing to do with the fact that she is a female hunter, but I think we just get right into it here and, listen to the story.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's the story, it makes you feel like you're right there next to her, and you were going through it as, the hunt was unfolding and her, gearing up for the season and everything. And it's crazy. She had history with this deer from the previous year, and I don't know, it's really cool in the way that she thought of an out-of-the-box type of plan on how to get a ground blind in this area is I've never heard of it before, and it's really cool. Enough foreshadowing it. Like you said, let's get to this interview, and I'm ready for everybody to hear, her tell the story. So without further ado, here is Lindsey Zastrow. But before we get to that, if any of you guys are in the market for new cables and strings, look no further than America's Best Bowstrings. And if you want more information on them, go to americasbestbowstrings.com and tell them the guys from the Fall Podcast sent you. All right, on the phone with us today is Lindsey Zastrow. Welcome to the show, Lindsey. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you could come on and we could find time to do this. And you officially are the first female on the podcast.
Awesome.
Justin and I were sitting down and we were talking and we wanted to branch out and get some female hunters and get their kind of point of view and everything. And we actually had a mutual friend, Bryant, from America's Best Bowstrings. He recommended you as well, and we thought it'd be a good fit and bring you on here and talk about your hunting endeavors. So, Lindsey, if you could you please, introduce yourself, where you're from, what you do for a living, and, where you grew up?
Yeah, of course. I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska. Grew up splitting time between Omaha and our family farm out west of Lincoln. So grew up, getting to be out in the field with Grandpa, raising cattle, raising hogs. And the country always had a special place in my heart. And for college, ended up playing softball out at University of Colorado Springs. Unfortunately, didn't take advantage of the great hunting out there when I was a Colorado resident, which I really regret, but got to do a lot of fishing. That's mainly what I was involved in kind of growing up, was fishing with my dad. He wasn't a big hunter. My grandfathers were, but spent a lot of time in the boat with my dad and just really being outside, and had the opportunity a few years ago to move over from Nebraska to Iowa, buy a small acreage, far enough away from the city, but still close enough to work and all of that. So I've spent the last 3 years kind of turning this acreage into a whitetail habitat, and currently, to pay for my hunting endeavors, I work as an analyst at TD Ameritrade, the stock brokerage firm. So do a lot of sitting at a desk, a lot of analyzing, crunching numbers, looking for fraud, anti-money laundering by day, and then come home and it's out in the woods, out in the field at night.
That's awesome. So you're on both ends of the spectrum, really.
Yeah. During the day, I'll do business suit and get home at night, and it's, for lack of better terms, pretty redneck. So
That's awesome. Well, growing up, did you have a mentor or anything, or, somebody that got you into hunting? You mentioned your grandfather. Is that kind of who got you into the whitetail side of hunting?
My grandpa on my mom's side was always into deer hunting, antelope hunting. He was a big rifle hunter. So I grew up around that and always just kind of being in awe of listening to his stories, his passion for it. Never really understood it. I was too young, but, we'd go over, the deer would be hanging in the front yard. And it was back in the days where there wasn't social media, so size of the rack didn't matter. It was purely about the excitement of the hunt and being able to be successful and sharing that with your family. And I just always remembered kind of the emotions around it. It wasn't, oh, well, what's its score? It wasn't, oh, did you get it posted here? Did you get this picture or anything like that? It was just everyone celebrating, what goes into hunting, what that animal means, the food that animal is going to provide, and being grateful for it. And never did much hunting as a kid. Was just kind of grew up around it. Did a lot more fishing with my dad, and really didn't get into the hunting side until after college. My husband at the time was the one who really got me into it. He saw I had a passion for any type of shooting sports, shotguns, rifles. I grew up shooting a lot of firearms, not necessarily competing, but trying to improve my marksmanship and all of that. And he saw that, and he grew up hunting. So kind of was like, hey, why don't you marry these two things? You want to be out in the woods, and you tend to be a really good shot. So let's try to put this together and see what we can make happen. And the first hunt I went out was actually with a rifle, and it was a late season Nebraska hunt. And gosh, I think we spent, I don't know how many days driving 2 hours both ways in the freezing cold days of early January for this antlerless tag I had. And it just kind of clicked that's the piece of the outdoors that had been missing for me. And shot my first deer with a rifle, and it was after that season his brother, so now my ex-brother-in-law, introduced us to archery. And so the first bow I ever tried to pull back was his dad's old Matthews that was probably set at 65 pounds. The draw length was 3 or 4 inches too long. And but for some reason, I was just stacking arrows with this bow that wasn't set up for me at all. And just right there, fell in love with, being an athlete growing up. I'm very competitive against myself. When I'm trying something new or trying to learn something, I want to become proficient at it. And so in my mind, I looked at it as a brand new challenge.
Right.
And so I spent that whole, that was probably in March or April, and spent that whole year really learning the proper form, proper technique, reading anything I could online, watching various clips of, what does it take to be 20 yards from an animal and being able to pull your bow back without getting seen, and just everything that you don't really have to think about with rifle hunting. And so that fall ended up sitting with my bow for the first time, and the first time I had a deer within 20 yards, I was shaking so bad I couldn't even think of grabbing my bow. I was an absolute mess, but it was that moment and that adrenaline and that feeling of just, it was a spectacular feeling of being so close to nature and watching them in their natural habitat. That was that was it. That was the defining moment where I knew bow hunting for me was always going to be part of my life from that moment on.
Yeah. And, you mentioned, being that close to a whitetail or an animal in general, and that's what bow hunting gets you. And, I got to see it firsthand because I got my wife into bow hunting. She was a lot like you. She grew up hunting with a gun, with a rifle. And, when we met, she started getting into bow hunting. She liked hunting, but she never bow hunted. And the first time she had deer in front of her, like at, 10, 12, 20 yards, it was a different experience. And, when you're growing up, like, Justin and I grew up hunting since we were little. So, our dads got us into it. And you don't really, when you're going through it, you don't really realize it, when you're that little. But I got to see it with her, and it was really a powerful thing. I mean, you really have to learn that and make sure your instincts and your movements and everything you do is calculated, because when whitetails, I mean, they're so smart, and when they get that close to you, I mean, any last little movement or sound or even smell, the game can be over quick.
No, definitely learned. There's been a lot of trial and error in my time hunting. You're exactly right, of learning what movements are acceptable, what aren't, and that's just kind of part of it. You get frustrated, but you can learn something every time you go out, and that's the nice thing.
Yeah,
definitely, for sure.
I mean, everybody remembers their first deer, like whether it's with a rifle or a bow, but there's something different about your first successful archery hunt. I mean, and it's not even a matter of having to kill it. Like you pull the gun up to your shoulder, you put the animal in your crosshairs and pull the trigger, and it's like you didn't really have much of an interaction. Like, you saw it, you found it, you got in range, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But like, to be that close and to know you did it right, that you got close enough to where you could be effective with bow and arrow. I mean, we've had Aaron, you can attest to this, like, and even Lindsey, like, you can see their eyes move, like, if they're that close. You can hear them breathing.
Yep.
You can see their expressions, and, like, they know something's not right. Or else they don't, or else they have no idea, and they're completely natural. And either way, like, you're in their zone, and you can just appreciate, what they go through on a daily basis just to stay alive. But then it's like, you're in that situation, and you're the one that gets to decide, like, am I going to shoot this or am I not? It's just like...
Exactly.
It's different. Like, for anybody who has never bow hunted, like, if you've thought about it, just go try. Like, find somebody to go with and just see if you can sit with them. And, like, it's just so much more, I guess, rewarding.
Yeah, it really is.
There's almost just like that switch where, in a whitetail, where they go from 100% full alert, on edge, to relaxed, calm as can be. I've been in those instances where they're calm as can be. I've been on the phone having conversations, and deer are 12 yards away, not caring at all. But then you have those other moments, you blink and they see that movement and run off. It's just spectacular and such a challenge to figure out, is this deer in that relaxed state or are they in high alert? Because there's not one telltale sign.
No, and it's like being able to read that body language tells you what you can do, what you can get away with. Like you said, if they're totally calm, like they have no idea you're there, you could be texting or having a conversation or, getting away with moving, or like in our case, just constantly trying to follow them with the camera. Other times it's like, oh crap, don't move. Like, they start like kind of like rubbernecking you, trying to figure it out. And then they just kind of, they kind of fake it. Like they walk away and then look over their shoulder real quick. Like, are you still there? Like, I'm not sure yet. I don't know what to do. It's a different experience. So that's how we could try to chalk it up to as many different things as we could talk about here for an hour and a half, but that's all there is to it. It's just so different.
Yeah. And Lindsey, I'm going to back up just a little bit. You said something that really I don't want to just let go, because you hit the nail on the head when you had talked about, back in the day when it wasn't a game of inches, or how many inches were on its head. And, I really appreciate that about you and, everybody that got to grow up in that area, because Justin and I are the same way. And, now, like, I even get wrapped up into it because I'm in the hunting industry, and it's so easy to get wrapped up into, how many inches was it? How big was it? Oh, you're not accepted if you don't kill a big enough animal. And it's like, man, like, I hate that. I don't like that, and I don't want, if one day my daughter wants to hunt, I don't want her to be like that. I don't want her to, come up like that. And I'm glad you mentioned it, because, for someone now, I see, some of my friends have kids that are, out there hunting. I mean, 9, 10-year-old kids that are shooting, really good deer, but then if, and they're kids, don't get me wrong, but it's like they get shunned if they kill like a little, 6-point or something. And, and it's like, hunting's supposed to be fun. And I'm not saying just go out and just start, hammering down all these young deer and these little deer, but, just let them be kids for a little while and get the opportunities and get those deer under their belt and let them graduate up into that. I'm glad you made that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, really looking back, it was, now you let someone know you have something down. Well, how big was he? What do you think he's going to score? And gosh, every phone call I've ever made to my grandpa or my uncle, like, that's never been even one of the first 20 things they tell me. It's, congratulations, that's awesome. Like, you worked your butt off.
Right.
There's no concern for how big, I was ecstatic with this buck I got, but that my grandpa was going to see, because I knew if it would have been a small, like 4x4, he would have been just as ecstatic. But he knew the work, that goes in. So he was thrilled, but either way, at the end of the day, like, it's changed so much. And I'm a big proponent of like herd management and, my buck to doe ratio. And I'm very selective with the bucks I do harvest, more from just a management perspective, not because I'm looking for bigger each year. It's pure management. But yeah, gosh, it was just, thinking back to those times, when they're all standing in the front yard, it just was so much of a different time, that I think we've gotten away from a bit.
Yeah, I really agree. And, now, on my property here in Michigan, we're very highly pressured here. And, Iowa's a little different. Even Illinois is a little different. And, I'm fortunate enough to be able to have some, really good quality deer here. They're pretty few far in between, but, I've kind of graduated. I've killed some pretty good bucks here in Michigan, that I declare good bucks, but what I'm really trying to go for is a 3.5-year-old deer here. And, Justin and I have had conversations with other guests and just talked about it and everything. A 4.5-year-old deer here in Michigan in my area is kind of a unicorn. It's, you don't see a lot of them. Honestly, this year I chased one. This was the second year I chased him, but this year he was 4.5 years old. And, that was the first 4.5-year-old deer that I've been able to chase in Michigan in all my years of hunting here. And, I've said it before, Mark Drury once said, you're only as good as your farm and, what is on your farm. And, I'm not going to sit here and try to kill or go after 150 or 160 inch deer when I just don't have them, and there it is, the inch thing, talking about the inches. It's just so easy to get wrapped up into it. But my rule here is, I'm going for age. I'm going for a 3.5-year-old deer, and then hopefully I can graduate from that to a 4.5, because, the 3.5-year-old deer here in my area, that's the upper 10% of my bucks here, I believe. And they still get me really excited to chase them. And that's what I really like about it. And I really don't care for the headgear. I do. I can't sit here and say it doesn't mean anything to me, because it does. It does have a good amount to it, to the chase and the challenge and everything. But I'm really looking for a 3.5-year-old deer. And then when I go out of state, I'm looking for a 4.5-year-old deer, because I'm going to a lot of areas that are, they have a lot of 4.5-year-old deer, and that's just the challenge that I put on myself, basically. You had mentioned your buck from this year, and you were able to kill a really good buck here in Iowa this last season. I'd really like to dive into that and kind of go from where you started with getting the property, and maybe break down the property, how many acres it is, and kind of what does it consist of? Like, what does it look like? If you can give all the listeners a good audio picture of the farm.
Yeah, so I was definitely blessed this year. Got the first buck of the season, 2 sits on my own property, and then was fortunate enough to be invited out to a friend's property. Ended up shooting another buck, so I was able to get 2 in the freezer within 7 days. So that was pretty amazing, especially going. I ate tag soup the last 3 years in Iowa for bucks. So to go 3 years of living in Iowa, everyone, the biggest bucks are in Iowa. You're going to, every year your walls are going to be full of bucks, all of this. And to go 3 years
Yep.
with nothing.
Yeah, they're under every rock,
Yeah, like I just felt, what am I doing wrong? Like, here all these people are, do you guys, at the time my husband was living here, and both of us, we never successfully harvest a buck off our own property. And they were here, like there's plenty of deer, just never was in the right place at the right time. So yeah, I feel extremely fortunate of how this year went, and last day of the season had kind of a last minute effort at a big trophy doe, biggest doe I've ever seen. And one I was actually going for the herd management. She is an old barren doe, and wanted to kind of get her out of there. And so yeah, it was a phenomenal season, and one that's going to be hard to beat. But yeah, so the property is 40 acres. I'd say about half of it's kind of in the bluff, really thick timber, hard hunting, lots of up, straight, and down hills. Can't really put food plots in it just due to the terrain. And then the other half of the property is surrounded by cornfields. It's more, it's flat. There's a couple ponds, a little bit of a wooded area. There's also a big marsh. There's a ton of ducks that come through there. And then I'd say probably 10 to 12 acres of just grass, like pasture area that I've been gradually turning into food plots. The property, when we bought it, had been abandoned for about 10 years. And so there was no building.
Oh, wow.
There was a barn on it, but no house, no anything. And so just the weeds were so overgrown. It was incredible. We walked on the property and you could hardly walk. It was just so thick of weeds and saplings and fireweeds, just everything. And at the time, we weren't afraid of a little sweat equity, and saw, even despite all of that, there was pretty good sign. We were looking for a property that we could walk out the back door and go hunting from. And the sign was plentiful in and we knew with hard work kind of what it could be. And so gradually, especially on the flat side, have been clearing kind of those weedy areas, putting in food plots, and then there's the old owners actually raised ostriches. So there's
Oh, really?
a large, I call it the ostrich pen, which is about half an acre of 6-foot chain link fence. That I'll eventually is gonna plant some various trees in and stuff for kind of the habitat.
Okay.
But yeah, right now it's all kind of a work in progress. Have, I'd say, about 3-4 acres of food plots down on the other side. Last year had a nice clover plot up behind the house, but with some of my implements breaking down this year, it was one of those years where both tractors were broken, the four-wheeler broke, kind of everything wanted to go at once. So it made planting a lot more manual than I had hoped, but got out and did the best I could to get that done. But so this year I'll be, there's probably at least, I'd say, 3 acres down on the flat side that I'm going to try to till up and do a nice little clover plot in there, and then disc up the other food plots down there and try to get some brassicas. I think I did a little bit of did winter wheat last year, and then some oats. The deer hammer the oats here, and so I'll probably try to do that again this spring. And it's been such a big undertaking. I've tried to keep that in mind year over year of just trying to do a little more each year. There's so much to be done. It's not all going to happen in a year. So just trying to make those little improvements to the habitat of going in, clearing out some trees, and then, cutting down trees to make it more protected in areas, looking at their bedding structure. When it snows, I tend to hit the bluff and go hike and really look at where are they bedding, where are their trails, what are their patterns, where are they coming from, just to have a better idea. So when I do get down the road, to being able to do, to make other adjustments to the property, I can kind of play into their natural patterns instead of reprogramming them altogether.
So, when you acquired the land and you said it was really grown up, and basically it sounds to me like you had a piece where you could just mold it to basically whatever you wanted. So what was your first inclination or first thoughts of what you wanted to do on the farm to start getting it in the right direction where you ultimately wanted it to be? Was it food plots? Was it, timber stand improvement? Or, where did you start with that?
It was definitely on the food plot side of, it's surrounded by cornfields, so there's plenty of food sources around it. So my property is actually divided by a road. So I call it the bluff side and then like the pasture side. And and on the pasture side, that's where we were really looking at kind of the most bang for our buck of, okay, these deer will be coming out of the bluff. On that side of the road, there's no other timber. It's just straight fields. My property's the only one, within probably a mile on that side of the road with timber. And so in my mind, it was that this might be a great staging ground for them. They still feel protected. They're in the timber. Instead of going from the bluff across the road straight into the cornfield, they're probably coming across the bluff into that patch of ground, using the timber, using some of the overgrown fields to navigate their way into the corn to feel a bit more protected, especially once they cut it. It just gave them that little extra protection. And so that was really where we started. At the time, had an old Alice Chalmers diesel tractor, put the blade on it and just start, driving full steam ahead into these thickets and weeds and just trying to mow it down a little bit to really see what was there and what we had to work with.
So, I mean, you had the cover, so you're just trying to get more food on the farm to attract more deer to you. Is that kind of the plan you were following?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of cover, and you could tell just with the tracks, kind of, they were using it as a highway to get to the corn, or they rotate the corn and beans, but you could just tell they were kind of using that piece of the property as their funnel into those fields.
So a big transition area, especially with, a farm that you said was abandoned or vacant. Probably a lot of people haven't been on it, in, like you said, 10 years. So a lot of the deer felt safe and they knew they could go through there and they probably weren't getting hunted. And, so they just knew that was their natural corridor, and probably using some terrain features as well to travel through there. So, I mean, that sounds like I would love to be able to find 40 acres in Iowa that's been abandoned for 10 years. I don't know about you, Justin, but I think that'd be a good problem to have.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate it. If you know of any.
Well, if I find any others, I'm trying to acquire some more. So
Yeah, I don't blame you.
It was unfortunate, though, hiking the property. Again, it being abandoned for so long, you could tell people had been setting up like makeshift tree stands, and then also found there's a piece on the bluff that overlooks the pasture side, and I found a bunch of rifle shells. So it was very evident at some point, or rifle casings, that someone was up there and they were poaching deer from the bluff.
Yep.
And I found, I don't know how many skulls I found with the antlers cut off just right at the base.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
At least 4 or 5. And so that was pretty disheartening to see, just that, people would take advantage of that piece of ground and come out here and do that. But, thankfully, seeing some of the deer on camera, didn't seem to hurt the population too much, but it was disheartening when I found those, and then finding the dead heads with the antlers cut off of, just wondering what people had been up to. But again, if you're a hunter and are looking at sign, I mean, right away you're seeing how big of a transition piece that is, and the deer are definitely funneling in through in there day and night to get to those fields.
I was just going to ask if you've had any other issues with people that still try to do that. Like, have you had anybody trespassing or heard any other gunshots, randomly, or anything that makes you think there's still people out there using that property like that?
I've had trouble with trespassers for morel mushrooms, and then I had an issue with a guy illegally trapping coons on my property. Thankfully, I haven't seen anything with deer. When I forget our local DNR guy's name, when they drive by, I try to stop and chat with them, see how things are going, and I always joke, the driveway on the pasture side, it's kind of covered, but I joke with him that if they were ever to do one of those where they put the dummy deer out and see if anyone's going to shoot it from the highway, that would be the place to do it, because it's kind of hidden, and so we always joke about that if they ever wanted to do that sting operation, it's a good spot. So if you're ever in Iowa and see a deer off a highway, don't shoot it for many reasons, but it's probably set up there to get you in trouble. But yeah, unfortunately, we've had, with it being abandoned for so long, people, I had one guy morel hunting, and he was like, well, I've done this for the last 8 years. And I was like, well, that's great. It's my property now. You can't be out here. And he was like, well, I've done it for 8 years. And so, I mean, I think you just get that anywhere, and it, just comes knock on the door, I would have gladly let him morel hunt, or even the guy trapping coons. But I guess some people don't feel they need to ask for permission these days, and
Yeah.
I think they can
Ask for forgiveness.
yeah, I think they
Right.
can do whatever on other people's property.
Yeah, and that's a. I mean, it makes it tough for anybody else who wants to do it the right way, because I think so many people are used to, just being taken advantage of, that, they're more inclined to say no. I feel like. I mean, I could be wrong, but I just feel like it's not the same. It's intimidating to have to go up and try to ask somebody for permission to,
Right.
I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but it seems like it's
It is
kind
intimidating,
of been
though. I mean,
ruined. Like it's not the way it used to be.
exactly. I mean, even around here in Michigan, it's intimidating to go and ask, a neighbor that you might not have talked to much, because maybe you had shot a deer and it ran over on their property, and it's like, oh, I have to go ask them, and it's kind of intimidating to do that as well when you definitely haven't met them,
Yeah.
and I kind of ran into that this year, but luckily I've met the guy before, and it wasn't as bad, and he was so generous and said, I could go on there and do whatever I needed to do.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like, Lindsey, I'm new to Iowa as well. I just moved here. It'll be a year in March, but I was really surprised to find out that in Iowa you actually don't need permission to cross property boundaries if you're tracking a wounded animal.
Hmm.
Did you know that?
Yeah, I had. We had kind of read up on that when we were
Yeah.
coming over here, because I don't know kind of about in other states, but a lot of the regulations and laws in Iowa seem to be pretty gray, not necessarily black and white.
Yeah. Oh,
we
very.
were definitely asking a lot of questions when we first moved over
Yeah.
here, because it just unfortunately seems like the decision would be up to that officer, not really
Right.
a true black and white.
Yeah, I've
law.
heard that a lot. Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of people, as I'm still trying to figure some of this stuff out. And, like, you can do all the homework and research you want, and it's like, well, it doesn't really answer my question. And then it's like, well, I guess I'll just have to defend myself if I'm ever confronted, But I don't know. It's not the way you want to go out there. You don't want that kind of mentality, thinking you're going to ask for forgiveness instead of permission, like you said earlier. But it's just so, like you said, it's just so gray, and it's kind of mind-boggling for how much Iowa does to protect their deer.
Yeah, no, I've been really surprised, and I've talked to different DNR officers, and you get a different answer from officer to officer, and that's what makes it hard. That it's
Yeah.
truly a judgment call in some areas to the officers, and so in my case, I tend to be really hesitant and kind of gun shy in some certain areas, just because it's I won't ever want to potentially jeopardize my right to hunt, but at the same time, I want to do what's best for the deer, what's best for kind of my herd, and looking out for them, and so
Sure.
it is that balance of I'm truly looking out for the animals. I want them to be healthy. I want them to get kind of the food sources and proteins we need, but at the same time, there's that balance of where's the line
Right.
when things
Right.
are so gray.
Have you guys ever heard of the purple law? I think that's what it's called.
I have.
haven't.
Is Iowa a purple state? I don't think it is. Missouri is. So have you ever drove around and you see all these, the property painted in purple, like trees and stuff like that?
Yeah, like the first 3 or 4 feet of a tree is painted. Yeah.
Yeah, so even just like a ring around it. So I know in Missouri they have I think it's called like the purple law. It can't be. It's something like that. But so basically what I've been told is you in Missouri, I think it is, in Missouri, you can go on someone's property if there's no if there's no like signs or anything up, you can go on their property without permission, I believe. I might have to fact check that.
That's
But
crazy.
if the owner goes around and they paint it in purple, like the trees, so basically, like, the no trespassing signs, you go and take a rattle can of spray paint in purple, that is what tells, no trespassing, no hunting, basically. And I didn't know if Iowa had that or not.
Not that I know of.
Yeah, I'm not for sure. I have plenty of no trespassing signs hung up. I probably went a bit overboard. But yeah, mine, I have, especially that guy who was trapping coons. He was in a white Chevy, so I actually have a big sign that I made that says, "No trespassing, property under surveillance. This means you, white Chevy," down on the passenger side.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I do want to get into this season. We kind of veered off there a little bit, and that's probably my fault. But I want to get back onto this season. So, coming into this season, this deer that you killed on your farm this year, I specifically want to talk about him. So, can we kind of go through the summer and everything, and maybe even it starts before that? Did you have any history with this deer year before or 2 years before on the farm?
Yeah, so last year actually came to full draw on this deer twice up on the bluff side. I was sitting in a stand, and it was one of those stands. I didn't put much effort into the shooting lanes because I never really thought it was going to pay off much, just kind of had it hanging in case the wind wasn't the best, just kind of as a last resort stand, and came to him full draw in the same day twice, and both times it was that feeling of I could take the shot, but it's not a true shooting lane, and I could potentially hit a branch, and it was that internal battle each time of I could potentially make this shot, it could be a clean, ethical shot, or God forbid there are branches in the way, it could hit a branch, and I just didn't know. And so I ended up letting down both times and really debated, had that internal debate with myself of, I feel like I did the right thing as a hunter who prides myself on, taking those ethical shots of really wanting to do things right. But again, living in Iowa, not harvesting a buck, it ate at me, to be honest, of the what if. Like, what if I would have, pulled the shot off and it would have been a clean kill, be a different story. But then you'd start thinking, well, what if the arrow would have hit it and potentially wounded the deer, or gut shot and didn't find it, or just all the what ifs. Because at the end of the day, I think the last thing we ever want is to injure a deer and make it suffer. And that's really what went through my mind of, as hard as it was to not take the shot, it was truly the right thing to do, to just wait. And again, last year, ate my buck tag, and that was fine, because at the end of the day, I knew I'd rather do that than to live with the fact I injured a deer by taking a poor shot that I was second guessing.
Yeah.
Now
with that deer, after you took, you had an opportunity at him twice. You had, your full draw on him. Now, did you know at the end of the year? Did you know that he made it through, or was it kind of one of those things that like you just didn't know? He didn't show up on trail cam anymore, or was he there all the time still?
He was not. So it's kind of weird on this property. Come like January through, I'd say, March, for whatever reason, the bucks just vanish. And so it's always a waiting game until kind of the middle of the summer, when you can really start seeing their racks develop of what truly made it. I don't know why with the property, but each year it seems like almost routinely on January 1st, the bucks they must have a bunker somewhere in the bluff that they just go hide, because they're not around here. And then, come midsummer, you can kind of start seeing the racks. And so it really wasn't until the middle of last summer that I knew he was back. and so that got me excited to see him back, and kind of that feeling of, okay, doing the right thing last year, letting down, this could really pay off and be something special this year.
So going into this year, were you aiming like for him? What was that like? Was it this deer or nothing, or were you just like, oh, he's on my radar, I'm really going to try to hone in on him, but if there's another shooter around, I'll definitely indulge with that deer?
So this year, in prior years, it was kind of, I knew what bucks were out there, and it was always more of the whatever comes into range. And this year, I really changed things up and 100% focused in on this deer. It was learning everything I could about him, being an analyst in my day job, my kind of analysis skills, I guess, kind of come over into my hobbies, especially with deer, of looking at timestamps on the trail, camera pictures, looking at moon phase, temperature. I document all of that, of really looking at the numbers and trying to let the data drive the information I'm gathering about these deer. And so this year really changed it up and 100% focused on knowing exactly where this guy was at what time of the day, what his patterns typically were. And so once I kind of started narrowing that in with various trail camera pictures and figuring out patterns, I decided to kind of revamp my entire setup for where I was going to sit. And that was the other thing about past years, is I probably had 8 or 9 stands up on the property. And this year I really wanted to focus on just one spot. So really dove into the data on the prevailing winds and looking at that and really figuring out the best setup to be completely invisible. And got lucky with his pattern, his travel pattern. He was always walking by, for his transition back into the bluff and then into the cornfield, was walking by the swamp area on my property. And so had a good friend come out, and I was kind of showing him the pattern of the deer. And I was like, gosh, for prevailing wind, it'd be great to have maybe a tripod stand on this side. There's no trees to put a tree stand in. But I really didn't know what to do. And he had the awesome idea. He was like, why don't you build a little dock in your swamp area and secure your ground blind to it and just have a raised ground blind? And looking at it, I was like, that's a phenomenal idea. No predators are going to come from the swamp in Iowa. At least you hope.
Right.
You hope there's no gators out there that you don't know of. But so, after getting that idea, I was like, gosh, to be essentially in the water in a spotted deer in Iowa won't expect, a predator, any sort of thing to come from. And it worked for prevailing wind. I was like, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So out in the heat of the summer was building a little dock, 3-foot tall dock to submerge out there in the swamp, and got that put in and got the ground blind all attached, and actually did some trial run sits. That was my other big thing of I've never hunted whitetail out of a ground blind, and my biggest fear was, I have him patterned, I know what's going to happen, and then like I'm going to do something in the ground blind to spook him or do something. And so I actually did some trial run sits where I'd just go and sit out there and kind of walk through it in my mind. Actually sat out there one night and he walked in kind of on cue. That was pretty neat just to see prior to season opening. And so just kind of walking through it in my mind. And that was kind of a big risk to take, of if I would have scared him at that point or done something wrong, it might have messed up his pattern. But for me, I really wanted that confidence of, okay, if I pretend draw right now, do I have enough room for, my elbow? Am I going to hit the back of the blind? Is my stool high enough? Is the angle's good, all of that. I really wanted to leave no room for air and to be 100% confident. So it was a big risk, I think, going out prior to season and just kind of sitting and taking it all in and watching the deer come in and making sure it was just kind of a trial run for everything, the scent control, all of that. And that night, everything worked great and just kind of gave me that confidence that the setup was how it needed to be.
Right. I mean, that's a crazy idea. But I mean, that's an awesome idea, though. I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, that's so cool that you guys thought of that, like, out of the box thinking. And right when you said that, it made me think about a piece or a spot on my property that I have the same scenario in, and I never thought of that idea. To build a little barge, basically, a little dock that you put out there and put the blind on it, and it's ingenious, really. And so once you built that, and how far did you take it out into the water, off of shore?
It was probably. It wasn't too far. It was maybe like 6 feet offshore, just because I didn't want to have to wade through that much water. And thankfully, there was a nice kind of bushy barrier between it and the kind of the main field they walked through. If there wouldn't have been those bushes, I would have pushed it back a bit further to give me that added protection. But yeah, it was where I ended up shooting the buck at. He was only 12 yards away, so it was still fairly close to the field. But I had enough kind of texture and that depth that the blind didn't stand out too much.
Yep. So was your plan to try to get after him first thing as the season opens? Was he pretty daylight and pretty consistent, later in the summer to where you knew you had to get after him right the first week?
Yeah, he definitely was. He was like clockwork. It was within 10 minutes of sunset, it seemed. It was every 2 days and then 1 day off. For whatever reason, it was a 2-1 pattern that he was doing. And so I went out opening day, and it was his off day. And so I had taken October 1st to hustle work. My boss is used to it now, where it's just kind of a holiday for me. Of even if I didn't have a buck patterned, or even if it would have been 100 degrees, I would have been out anyway, just because. And so I after that first sit of the season, I knew I didn't really want to go and pull trail cam cards. I didn't want to disturb the area too much. And so I waited to get out until that next Friday. And that Friday ended up falling on kind of his off day. And actually, after pulling the trail camera cards, he came in an hour later that day. So I got a little bit worried that I had those 2 sits under my belt, and didn't see him because, again, he was patterned. I felt good, again, using the data of really, really trying to predict where and when he was going to be, and looking at the pressure and the moon phase and all of that. And I knew I needed to make a move soon. And so went out again that Saturday. And I mean, I think taking a step back, this is my first season hunting completely alone. And so it was a pretty emotional experience of, doing everything from food plots and figuring out just kind of a game plan. And, I thankfully had a bit of help with the dock and getting that set, but it was truly that, a bit of an emotional time of, if things go great, it's on me, but if things go bad, there's no one else to blame. Like, it's on me as well.
For sure. Yeah.
And so I felt a little extra pressure. I'm I'm also terrified of the dark, so that was emotional for me even. I'll admit that Friday night, walking back to the house, I had to call a friend because I was terrified of even just walking up the driveway in the dark. So there was a lot of things I had to overcome, and just kind of suck it up of it. It's worth it. It's, just need to get it done. And so even that Saturday, so that would have been my third sit of the season, I was kind of having a bit of a pity party for myself, to be honest, of just, it was really scary walking back in the pitch dark last night. I don't know that I want to do that again. It just was a lot of emotions for me for a lot of reasons with the year I had. And I, again, called one of my good friends, and they were like, you know what, you just need to do this. You need to do this for yourself, prove to yourself that you can do it. You've worked your butt off all year. Just get out there. Like, you're going to be okay. You're happiest when you're out in the woods. So just get out there. Don't let kind of everything going on kind of derail your passion. And so I really took that to heart. And so sure enough, got out there Saturday, and just, I had that feeling. And I've never really had that before, of something special is going to happen. And I didn't want to get my hopes up, because I tend to be a pessimist, and not very optimistic. I was kind of like, okay, something just feels different about tonight. And like the wind was...
Now, I'm sorry, I got to stop you real quick. I got to ask you something. So did you have this deer so patterned to where you knew what wind direction he was coming in, or what moon phase he was coming in?
He was pretty regular. I forget what moon phase it was, but he was pretty regular with the direction he was coming in. He was coming in from the south, so he was headed north, and that's the way he'd typically come from south to north.
So was it mostly like a food to bed or bed to food kind of pattern then?
Yeah, it was. It seems like it was either. I know, like, his night bed was to the south, so I don't know if he had a day bed somewhere kind of northwest that I didn't know of, but I was pretty sure he was bedding south of there.
Okay, gotcha.
And so, yeah, he is typically coming, the way my blind was set up, it'd be coming from my left to my right. And I forget the wind direction that day was coming from the northwest, and so it was blowing my scent kind of right into the swamp, which was another reason I really liked the position of that ground blind, was because with that wind direction, it blew your scent right into the swamp where the deer aren't, and allowed it to dissipate. And
you knew you wouldn't blow him out of there, or your wind wouldn't be a factor, basically.
Yeah, because they're not ever going to come through the swamp, more than likely, and so it just felt good there. And I'm probably take my scent control over the top, but I get paranoid about it anyway. But yeah, so kind of starting that night, got in the blind, felt something good was going to happen, and had, I think it was a small button buck and doe came through early. I was like, all right, this is good, seeing movement. And next thing I knew, I heard something coming from the south, so working its way towards me. And immediately got the shakes, like immediate of, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, it has to be him.
Yep.
It has to be him. And so I'm trying to get my bow and trying to just breathe. And already picturing him in front of me and getting ahead of myself and all of that. And then
Yep.
the noise stops. And so I'm like, oh no, what happened? You know, I go over the top with my scent. I'm, you know, getting dressed on the porch in freezing cold weather. With having long hair for women, it's so hard to get the scent out of your hair, going to the blind with wet
Yeah.
hair because I was just out of the shower, and, you know, playing everything through my head of like, oh my gosh, I had this deer pattern. What did I do wrong? Did I move? Did he hear something? And so I was like, crap, you know, what did I do? So I'm texting everyone like, oh, what did I do wrong? Did he bust me on scent? This, that, and the other. And, you know, everyone's like, calm down. It's okay. It's going to be, just give it time. And so then I really got to thinking, you know, if he was leery for whatever reason, it's, you know, maybe there was a sound, maybe he caught my scent somehow. Like, okay, if I was...
So did you know it was him for sure?
I have a good feeling it was, because at that point I stepped back and it's like, if I was a big buck, what would I do if I thought maybe someone was there? And in my mind, it would have been crossing into the cornfield, going north, and then circling back through from north to south instead of south to north. And so it was maybe 5 minutes later that a smaller buck, I think he was like a 2x3, little fork buck, came through with a doe. And they were fidgeting a little bit, like just didn't seem super calm, and they kept looking behind them. And so I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure he did a big circle and he's coming. I have a small kind of strip of food plot between the corn and the swamp. Because like I have a feeling he's walking down that food plot in my direction.
Right.
And so just reading the language of the two deer that were in front of me, of constantly looking back, of just kind of being on edge. I was like, something's coming, and something big is coming. Like it's not, I have a lot of yearlings and fawns and that, and I've watched, you know, if their mom or another doe is walking in, kind of their body language, and this was a bit different. And so again, kind of my heart rate went up. I got my bow ready that time and gave it just a little bit longer. And the way my ground blind was sitting, you couldn't really see out of the side window. And so the first thing I see is just the tips of his antler. And he's just like standing there. And I didn't want to move. It was one of those moments where you're just frozen. Like, don't move,
Yep.
don't move, don't move. And just saw the tips, and I was like, that's him. It's got to be him. And then after what felt like 24 hours, he finally took a step forward, and sure enough, it was him. And it was one of those moments where you can't really believe what's in front of you. You have to kind of snap yourself back to reality, because I was honestly just in awe of this animal, of being, you know, 12 yards away from him at eye level in a ground blind, of just being so close. It was amazing just seeing him in his natural habitat, seeing the interactions with the other deer, and then coming to the reality of, okay, my goal right now is to harvest this buck. I need to get into that mindset,
Right.
and get ready. And so thankfully, you know, again, kind of watched the body language, watched his interactions with the other deer. He seemed pretty calm. Was just kind of munching on some of the brassicas and the food plot, and waited until he kind of stepped forward a bit and pulled back and gave him one kind of good more look, and that was that. Absolute pinwheeled him. It was one of those, the moment you let your shot go, you just knew
Yep.
right away. But of course, the pessimist in me, I was like, oh, I must have gut shot him or did this, and
You immediately go to the "what did I do wrong" kind of thing.
You start replaying it in your mind, and I thankfully heard him crash right away, and so that was, a huge relief of, because kind of where he went into, it was the very end of the food plot and then went into timber. And so, within 5 yards, he was into the timber and I couldn't see him, but heard a big crash and took that deep breath and just was in complete awe of, like, did that really happen? Did that plan just come together? I'd been hunting for 3 years, thought I had 3 years out in Iowa, thought I had that good plan, and it just never worked. And so I was truly, like, in shock of not really thinking what had happened just happened. And so I called my good friend, and like, I'm pretty sure he's down. Like, I didn't have words, couldn't even speak. And he's like, get it, let me see the arrow. It's been, you heard a crash, like, take me to the arrow. So we're on FaceTime and showing him the arrow. And he's like, go get your deer. That deer's dead. Like, go get your arrow. Or go, go put your hands on the antlers. Go get your deer. He's yours. He's down. Mission complete. And of course, me, I waited long enough just to, be cautious. So now it's pitch black. I'm terrified of the dark. And
oh man!
And now the reality sinks in that I have to go track this deer in the dark when there's tons of coyotes around. I've had a mountain lion track on my property. So everything starts going through my head, and I was talking to my friend. I was like, I think I'm just going to call my grandpa. I'm going to wait till he gets out here. And he was like, no, this is your deer. You're going to track it. You're going to put your hands on his antlers. You're going to enjoy the moment. Like, this is for you. You have to do this for yourself.
Yeah.
And of course, I was like, no, I think, it'd be really special if Grandpa could be here. And he was like, no, like, just go do it.
Trying to talk yourself out of it. I've been there.
So,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I start blood trailing it. And of course, he was on FaceTime the whole time of just keeping me kind of sane. And it started to rain at that point. So, of course, I was like, oh, no, the blood trail is going to be gone and never going to find this deer. And he was like, oh, my gosh, just keep walking. Like, you need to walk, like, 40 feet and you're going to find him. Just keep walking. So sure enough, I listened to his good advice and kept walking. And I'd say it was maybe 30 yards into the timber, and he was right there under he had kind of bedded under an old tree. And so at that point, my friend was like, all right, I'm going to leave you to it. Take your moment, give your respect, and call me here in a bit. So I hung up and just kind of had my moment of, I feel it's very important in hunting to show respect to the animal. I mean, I know we're feeding our families, but at the same time, we're taking a life, and that animal deserves respect for what they're going to provide, and knelt down and, kind of said my prayers, thanked the good Lord, and did my best to show that magnificent buck the respect he deserved. And spent a little bit of time with him, and then realized, unfortunately, it was the night of a Nebraska football game and the Floyd Mayweather.
Oh yeah, the Floyd Mayweather fight with was it the Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather?
Yeah, it was the night of that fight. So then, what's going through my head is, who of my friends is sober enough to come help me drag this deer out? Because, Husker football, I live close enough to Nebraska. It's huge. And I actually knew a bunch of my friends were down in Vegas for the fight, so I started making phone calls right away. And unfortunately, most of my buddies who had come were in Vegas, and got a hold of my grandpa, and he's, unfortunately getting to the age where he was ready to come out, but from the, hauling that big of a deer to the barn, couldn't offer that much help.
Right.
And so we got a hold of my uncle and then my neighbor. So they were the unlucky ones that got to come spend the evening dragging this massive deer probably a quarter of a mile to the barn, because we unfortunately had a bunch of flooding, and there was a lot of flooding in the field that the four-wheeler couldn't get back there. And
That's so cool, though. I mean, for you to be able to do that, and I kind of go back to when you said, when you saw the tips of his antlers and you were in the moment, and I bet you, whether you remember it or not, I bet you every single, blood, sweat, and tear that you had into that farm, leading up to it through the summer, building the dock, putting the blind out, running trail cams, it all flashed through your head in a matter of seconds, and was and then you just got locked in and you were dialed, and then, your instincts took over, and that was that. That's what's so cool to, about whitetail hunting to me, just those moments. That's so cool. And I was in that moment with you. It's like I was with you, you know what I mean? The way you were telling the story.
No, that's a really cool story.
definitely that moment where it's all that practice you go through. I'm a big believer. You can't grab your bow the day before season. You need to be shooting all year round. And I truly think in that moment, your mind just kind of blacks out, for lack of a better words, and you're truly relying on that muscle memory and that instinct. And I truly think, it was all not only the hard work of the property, but even with my form and shooting as much as I did leading up to it, that when I pulled back, there was no what if, there was no is this right or this right. It was, I was in tune with my equipment. I trusted it 100%. I knew I just needed to put the pin where I needed to put it, and what was going to happen was going to happen. And I think that's a big thing too of it's truly a year round thing. And I think we owe it to the animals to practice as much as possible as well. Because in those moments when you're shaking and you feel like you can't breathe or you're going to throw up, you're truly relying on that muscle memory.
I agree. And that I say it all the time, you get out what you put in. So the more that you put in, I feel like the more that you're going to get out of what you're doing. So I'm a firm believer in that.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. We've talked about the deer we've shot this year, Aaron, and it's like you just said, it feels like we were part of that hunt, like just the way you described it, and like to have your own piece of property, all those things that happened to you, to figure out how to hunt it. And I mean, the one person a deer doesn't want to get on the radar of as an analyst of all people. Like, you're going to figure out how to do this, you're going to figure out what's making them tick. So, but it's just cool, like how you applied such a unique strategy, like to get out in the swamp. And I mean, he was going that way for a reason, because there was no danger. He had that to his advantage with all that water there, and you figured out a way to capitalize on his sense of security. And to do it on your own property, like I said, after everything you had gone through, I mean, I can only imagine how, not just validating that was, but just I don't know. I'm kind of speechless about it, really. It's like,
no, I agree. I get what you're saying. Like, her being
I don't know what to say.
You being like a relatively new hunter as well. And that's what's blowing my mind, is just being a new hunter, figuring out your own land and these deer. For anybody, that's a huge accomplishment. And the way that you thought outside the box for, where to put the blind and all that stuff, it's still kind of mind blowing. And I have tremendous respect for you and what you've done, in the short period of time that you've been a hunter, honestly.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was. I knew just with the prior years, I'm sure, sticking with those plans would have paid off eventually. But, again, being an analyst, I can kind of analyze risk and reward and set my kind of risk tolerance of, how far out of the box am I willing to think and risk I'm going to take, like going and scouting in the blind. I knew that was a huge risk. But for me, it really helped is my bow set up in the right place if I went to grab it right now. Just getting all of that set with all of that really, really helped. And I think, the most special moment for me with my grandpa getting older, he was helping me field dress the deer with my uncle right there. And with it being so dark, we only had a few flashlights. I definitely wasn't set up for that, so that's on my list before next season to get a few better flashlights. But I was kind of getting frustrated with myself because I wasn't doing it fast enough, or I don't even remember what it was. And so my uncle asked to take over, and my uncle he started hunting with my grandpa. He didn't hunt as a child with him, has just started recently rifle hunting with him, within the last couple of years. So he hasn't got to experience, field dressing a deer with my grandpa or any of that. So his dad and my uncle got to take over field dressing that. And typically, all the other deer I've shot, I kind of try to do it all myself. Let me do it. It is my harvest. I need to do it all. But in that moment, I got to step back and, my uncle's working on my deer. My grandpa's leaning over, telling my uncle what to do. Of just in that moment it was so much more than just hunting. It was, my uncle's going to have memories with his dad that he's never going to forget. I'm getting to spend this time with my grandpa, who I don't know is going to be around much longer. It's my first deer alone on, my property. And it was so much more than the deer, the harvest. It was everything that kind of goes into it. And I even get chills just sitting here, just replaying when my grandpa put his hand on my uncle's shoulder, like, no, do this, do this. And it just brings people together, and in those memories you're never going to forget, even when people pass on. And I truly think, going back to the comments, that it was a spectacular buck. It was a 6x7, ended up measuring shy of 164. But I still feel even if that would have been a 130, 140 buck, those memories we made that night would have been the same, of having that family connection and family tie. And those are memories no one can ever take from you. And it's made, cooking that much more enjoyable to know that what I'm providing for myself, and when I have my family over, that from beginning to end, that was me, that I accomplished that. It's that confidence, perseverance. The day, that Saturday, I didn't want to get out there. I really didn't want to get out there, and I just knew I had to. And so it's really that culmination of everything, of when you truly realize that, hunting is just not going out and killing stuff. And that's what pains me, not to get political, but with the anti-hunters, like it's, when you're a true conservationist, it's so much more than just the kill.
Right.
And that's, I really hope people who maybe have that perception get to experience how incredible it can be at some point.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's what I love about hunting as well, is all those memories in just a short period of time of one evening. You get to have those memories, your grandfather does, and so does your uncle. Like that's hunting right there. That's living the outdoor lifestyle to me. That's awesome. It really is.
Yeah, for me, I was thinking it was kind of full circle, thinking about the way this conversation started and what it felt like to be, a little girl just kind of absorbing that, and like you didn't fully understand like what was happening. You were involved, you were watching, like you knew what a dead deer was, people were hunting, but like you just watch as all that stuff unfolds, and like a pat on the back or the story of the hunt, and it was you finally, like that was your time to be the one to tell the story and to have them pat you on the back. And like you said, like you kind of step back and you're out of your element almost, it's something that it's for everybody else as much as it is for you. And like that full circle moment to me is kind of where my mind went as you were describing that.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a season to top, but that's, I've had a lot of people commenting on that, and you've had a tremendous year, and that's kind of the nice thing though of,
yeah,
I understand that I could go out and I could hunt 400 hours next year and not harvest a single deer, but that's what makes hunting. I can prepare the same, I can do everything the same, and it just might not work out, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop going out, because I know, at some point, if you put enough time in, moments like that are going to happen.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. Well, Lindsey, I want to thank you for coming on and doing this. I've had a lot of fun. I mean, we're at an hour and a half, and it doesn't even feel like we've been talking that long, really.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to get to the other deer as well. The one that you actually got to get after later in the year, but maybe we'll save that for another time, a later podcast for sure.
Yeah, that one it was still a great story, but yeah, I still never named him, so I think this 6x7. I think we just ended up with nameless for the name because they never named him. But
there you go.
Yeah, and, yeah, like I said, that buck's gonna be one to remember.
Yeah, that's
always
so cool.
Will be. And it always will be. It's like I said, speechless. That's just an awesome story. Like, I don't know what else to say.
Well, let's wrap this up. Like I said, I appreciate you coming on and doing this, and hopefully next year you might be able to top this year.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Well, cool. I'm gonna sign off here, and Lindsey, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Boy, there you have it. I mean, I don't know about you, but I feel like I don't know what it is I feel right now. That was a crazy story. It was not a crazy story, but it was like a captivating story in a way.
Yeah.
Like I actually honestly felt like I was with her when she was doing that and going through that with her. And that's the perfect story of, like, from beginning to end, when she was little and how she got brought up in the outdoors, and now for it to come full circle with her and her grandfather and her uncle. I mean, crazy. I mean, that's like what movies are made of.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head. Like you and I are video guys, and that was, I could picture every step of the process and like every look on her face as she was, seeing those tines come through for the first time, or hearing that, saying it's got to be him, and then it disappears. It's like just those up and downs, and I want to do a film on it. Like, I'd like to go out there to Western Iowa and meet her and lay this one down on film, because I think there's really something to be had there.
Yeah, I agree, and I just really appreciate her coming on and telling her story. And she uncovered some demons too, like, as far as saying she's deathly afraid of the dark. That's a big thing. Like, not only just in her case, but like a lot of people suffer from that. Like, my wife, she's not the fondest of the dark either, and there's times when I'm out there and you have coyotes light up right next to you, and like a pack of them, and it's like it makes the hair stand up on your back, but there really is no boogeyman out there, I guess you could say, as Joel Burham would say. Or Adam Greentree.
Right.
But there are things that make you wonder. So for her to admit that's That's pretty big of her to say that.
Yeah, and it's, I think it's just kind of symbolic of what she had to endure and to go through, in working that property. I mean, going even back to acquiring that property, and it was like she did this by herself. And I killed my deer by myself this year, and I remember killing my first turkey by myself. And it's like, that's your moment. That belongs to you. And there's a moment right there, like as you walk up to that animal or when you first put your hands on it, that's where it hits you. That's the culmination right there of all the hard work. Just that moment of respect that you're giving to the animal. Everybody goes to the fact that, it's all so worth it. Every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears, and it is, but like it's not in like the, I scored the last goal, in the closing seconds of the game, kind of like, yes, I did it. It's just like it's a step back. It's kind of like an out of body experience, and I can only imagine the way she felt when she got to call her grandfather and say, I got him, I finally got him, and
right,
like you said, to have it come full circle and to have her be the one in the center of all that, being responsible for the story that's going to be continued to be told, for generations. It's just so cool to hear a success story like that.
It sure is, man. Well, cool. Let's wrap this one up, and another one in the books. I hope everybody enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.
I'm going like a cross on your brain.